selling in general, and I wrote a point about this recently in my journal of selling as performance breaks down in some way. You get it straight away and it shows you don't make the sale because people can tell that you're putting on a performance, right? I was put on a performance plan. So I thought I was doing fine. I was a professional poker player during my 20s. I was incredibly embarrassed actually when it happened.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Redesign Your Life Today, the podcast where transformation becomes reality, where saboteurs lose their grip, and your next level of clarity, confidence, and purpose is unlocked. It's all about transformation. And today, I've got the privilege to have a very special guest on my podcast. This is Chiraag Thanki. Chiraag is a lead one-to-one trainer at the world's largest sales training company, who has personally coached over 250 professionals across virtually every industry to make selling feel natural, authentic, and powerfully effective. So, Chiraag, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And
Thanks for having me and really appreciate the introduction.
well, you are very welcome. And this was a very brief introduction, but you see, the first question would be,
Mhm.
who is Chiraag, and what makes what makes him do what he's doing today? If you tell us a little about your story.
Yeah, with the story, it's interesting is what you start with. Where do you start, right?
Hmm.
So I was in the biggest B2C sales training company. And now since I now run my own gig per se, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so where do we start? I could start with my life, which was very different before when I was a professional poker player during my 20s.
Okay. Uh-huh.
So I'll skip that bit because I don't think it'll be as relevant for your audience. And then I had a business in coaching, which really, you could say, failed
Hmm.
straight up. And
Hmm.
then I got into selling, and I got into this environment where it was very high performance based, right? In selling, where we were all training a lot to get better. We were all so in this environment, we all wanted to get better and better and better at selling so much that we were all encouraging each other so much in this environment and culture. And in that space, I did a lot of training, spent a lot of money on sales training and coaching.
Hmm.
And I think there's one kind of key turning point during my career which happened, which is when I was put on a performance plan. So I thought I was doing fine. I had this bit of an ego about me as well, as we all do in selling a little bit. And then I got put on a performance plan, and that really rocked me. I was incredibly embarrassed actually when it happened.
Hmm.
And I felt like I couldn't show myself out there because I thought people had an impression about me, right? And just during that, I had a very quick turnaround during that period, but that was a big wake up call of where I should put my focus on and what I should be doing from a selling point of view. And then within that company, what happened is I've got a big passion for teaching and helping others, which I'm sure you resonate with.
Hmm.
And
Absolutely.
then within that company, we had so many clients in our highest training, and I was predominantly the lead one-to-one trainer. So I had quite a crazy calendar on most days of 14 back-to-back one-on-ones and helping out clients. So that's my background there. Then I started from there having a different philosophy of things of what I thought sales should be compared to what the company had. And
Hmm.
so I took a big leap of faith. I didn't have an audience online. I didn't have anything, just it's me, my wife, my son. I'm the only person that works in the family. And it took a big leap of faith. And I know you're into spirituality, that I was hearing this message to go. And it was absolutely the right thing to do. And yeah, that's my story, I guess, ultimately.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing. I mean, it's a beautiful story, and so obviously you've got a huge experience in training, and you mentioned like few words, like for instance, ego.
Yeah.
And how and you said as well that afterwards you had like you followed, I guess, your instinct. You had a leap of faith when you started your company. How important is it for you? I mean, to and for people in sales as well, to put their ego on the side and perhaps to trust themselves in the process.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's a very deep topic, I think, that one.
It is a deep
Right.
one, I
It's a very
know.
deep one. I think it's less about putting the ego to the side, but more going through it that allows us to get to these spiritual states and being states that we can get to. Because selling in general, and I wrote a point about this recently in my journal of selling as performance breaks down in some way. And it
Mhm.
either breaks down, you get it straight away and it shows you you don't make the sale because people can tell that you're putting on a performance, right? Or you get some really troubling consequences later in life. I don't know if you've seen much about the Beckham family saga. Have you read about that recently?
Yes, of course. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's a big
Yeah.
one. That I don't follow much of the news and things, but that one really caught my attention because it's such an alarm bell and a warning signal, I think.
Mhm.
When if you look at the Beckhams, they had this documentary where the whole image is of being this down-to-earth family, ultimately. When you look at the reality of things, of putting on a performance of if you've got if I imagine that this performance that you put on has this consequence of where your son now wants to disown you publicly. I think that is a really troubling consequence. And I genuinely don't believe in sales as performance. And when it happens that way, we all get caught in it in some way in selling when you look at your recent results. But it's about knowing how to deal with that and also knowing how to prevent that through. I know you do a lot of this as well, which is through the unconscious. So we don't arrive so much into that position. Yeah. Don't know if that answers your question, but hopefully that does.
Yes, no, no, absolutely. I know it was a deep one,
Yes.
Chiraag. And you see, obviously, now you talk about performance, right? Performance, we
Yeah.
want to perform. But what about if we take a step back and think, actually, what about if active listening wasn't more important than performing, really being with our clients?
Yeah, active listening is an interesting one. Yeah, in a sense that it's important for sure. Like you just did there, you built a question on the language that I use in the answer, right? I think
Mhm.
that comes from different aspects. Things like clean language from therapy or NLP or different things that use this type of element. And I'm a big believer in that. That yes, okay, the listening is important so that you can build a relevant question based on the language that the person uses. Why is that important from a selling standpoint? Is that when we impose in sales, especially more and more these days, it doesn't have the same effect. In physics, you have that law, don't you? The every force has an equal and opposite force, right? That's what
Mhm.
tends to happen. Whereas if you use the words that come out of the other person's brain, then actually you're exploring their mind and their brain, which is where the decision needs to come from anyway. That's
Exactly.
that's my that's my take on that. Yes. So absolutely in sales conversations, a big part of how I operate, and I've seen others operate that's effective is taking notes and building questions of the language they use.
Yes, thank you, Chirag. And I think, when I read obviously what about what you were, doing as well, I think
Mhm.
the word authenticity is very important for you. And I think you said that pe- sales or natural sales should be an extension of the person rather than a performance. So, what do you think is the biggest shift someone has to kind of overcome to make it happen?
Very good point. That's a very good question. I thought a
Thank
lot
you.
about this.
Thank you.
Uh, And we can approach it in different ways. I think there's one point to make, and I try and say it in the most succinct way, which is when when you care about, so I know your audience is mostly business owners. So you look at okay, I'm at this level. I want to get to the net. I'm at this level of income a month. I want to get to this level of revenue or income a month, possibly, or a year, right? And that's important to set up. Though in that, if you're doing the selling for the business, or let's say you've got a team that are doing the selling, then what you find is there are many, 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 many pathways to go down, right?
Mhm.
We've
Mhm.
got books, we've got podcasts like this, we've got YouTube, you've got different groups that you can pay to join these days, or even free ones. You could read the Bible. There's multiple things that you can do, right? Now, I just wrote about this recently. I think a big concept is I call it ROT, which is return on time or ROT,
Mhm.
right?
Okay.
And from my experience, what you probably find this as well, Daniel, is that spiritually, I think by design, we have we are built as humans to be in communion. I.e., there are certain problems that no amount of self-reliance, journaling, meditation, prayer, and all the rest of it
Hmm.
fixes. Because I believe it's by God's design that actually these deeper aspects of ourselves only fully come out and get resolved in human communion. And it's by design. I've noticed that myself. I do quite a lot of journaling, right? Some days I might even do 5 to 6 entries in my journal, right? But still, I went yesterday to my inner transformation coach, and we worked on an aspect that was, when we did it together, was far deeper than what I've done in self-practice. And so I forget what the question was, but hopefully I'm answering it.
No, no. Yeah, the question was about uh, sales being a natural extension of who you are.
Yes. Okay. So I'll wrap that up. So when it comes to selling, if you want to sell more, let's say I've got the business that it's doing, let's say it's doing $200,000 a month. Now I know I want to get it to $500,000. So the natural thought process is, okay, it's strategy and tactics that I need, correct?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Right? Which it can be the case, but often what I found, especially with businesses, that your business actually runs on how to have it as a natural extension of yourself when selling is to do the deeper work yourself. Because what happens is when you then show up to be with somebody else, yes, you need to have an idea of what's happening psychologically in a conversation and all the rest, right? But what happens is you see the person going through something that you've gone through. And so when you speak with them, you're seeing them as almost, oh, I've seen that part in me. I know how to deal with it, which means you now speak from a place of experience and relatability rather than a place of trying to do something to that person. That's what I found works effectively and it allows you to find your own style to selling as well. Whereas when I see a lot of young, especially a lot of young people, and I was the same in my 20s, is that what tends to happen is you're trying to find yourself and your way of doing things through what you see online, which is has its limitations. So the too long didn't read answer is to that is when you find these parts of yourself, like yesterday, for example, we went through this part in myself that is still using stress as fuel,
Hmm.
which I know is a very common thing probably for a lot of business owners. But the fact that I've now gone deeper through that and we're actually going through that, it means that now if I speak to a business owner, I can relate. And also I've done the work, or I've done the work, or the work has been done. Let's take my ego out of it because I'm not that special. Yeah.
Well, no, thank you. Thank you really for this really beautiful sharing. And it's I said I can relate very much to what you are saying, Chirac, because
Yeah.
obviously, I mean, the words, I mean, people they can have a good script there, all well, but at the end of the day, as a customer, I mean, you want to feel that people are genuinely interested in you. It's not about your money, but it's really
Yeah.
about you, about understanding who you are, about really you willing to help them if you can help them.
Yeah. And it's not just you might think, okay, this is great, Trey. This is your opinion. In fact, the brain science, in fact, points to this now. The neuroscience is pointing to the fact there's something called a prior map that we have. When we enter into a conversation, as soon as I see you, Daniel, with your nice shirt and your lighting and all the background, I start to form an impression of you,
Mhm.
right? And from that impression, the rest of what happens occurs from that, right? And so if we're entering into conversations where our undercurrent is I'm here to perform, or I've got to perform to hit a number, or I've got to, even if I've got to do my process, the other person actually senses that on a deeper level. And so it's a lot of it is about getting what you're doing outside of sales, let's say, corrected in a way, for want of a better term, so that when you arrive in, it is a natural extension of yourself. That's a good part of it. It's a big part of it, but you also have to know what you're going through in the conversation. You have to have some strategy to it.
Absolutely. And again, this, yes, yeah, it resonates with me. And I think, Chiraag, you've coached, if I'm correct, over 250 professionals. Is it correct?
Yeah, salespeople as well as
Awesome.
a lot of business owners. Most of the people I work with now are tend to be business owners, actually. Yeah,
It's business owners. And what for you is like the main reason they struggle in sales? Or
good
the main
question.
reasons could be one, could be two.
I think a big one is there's a lot to it actually. So I'll try and make it short.
No,
I
but
think a big
just
one,
take your time.
I think a big lie, I wrote one down, is that there's a one size. I come from a sales training company where it's a this model works across all industries, right?
Hmm.
Though in some offers or some businesses, that it's not just a one size fits all model that's going to work. As an example, yesterday I was one of my clients. We talked, and he had a prospect book in from an ad, and then he ran a discovery for only 7 minutes, and he started to demo what he does. That is pretty much unheard of in what you would normally do.
Hmm.
But we know for his particular offer that no amount of discovery beforehand of pre-handling objections, it doesn't matter because as soon as they get introduced to the actual solution, certain objections come up. So the
Hmm.
demo has to be done in a certain way so that it handles the objections. So this is a very different thing that I would say to a different business owner. So the whole point is when it comes to why is it the struggle with sales is ultimately there's self-reliance, which is limited. We don't get eyes on what we're doing in our business enough. And with that extra set of eyes on what we're doing, we can actually go ahead and build something that makes a lot more sense. That actually fits the steps that your prospects take and the natural objections or so that they would have. So it's about getting specific. It's really about working with someone if you care about having a great return on your time. But these days, you can go on YouTube. You could go. I do this free training in the sales training group. There's like 800 people in there, and I see them making the same mistake that I was, which is continually going. I call it solution grabbing. It's like going to the pharmacy continually. But if you really want to really get complete solutions to things, I think of the yin yang. If you think of the yin yang, there's the white and the black, and there's the black in
Hmm.
the white, and that's by spiritual design again in that complete solutions to problems are in the structure of your specific problem. We go there in sessions with myself, we access parts of your brain that you can't access, unfortunately, through journaling and even prayer and at different aspects. They just don't come out. And you just have to believe me on it because I've done so much of that work and I still find there's more things to work on.
Yeah, and you see, obviously, we just discussed briefly before, but as I said,
Yeah,
as a mental fitness coach, I'm helping people understanding the saboteurs. These programs running on autopilot in their minds,
yeah,
which are really holding them back. So I suppose we might be talking about the same things. I mean, some
exactly.
people are
Yeah.
perfectionists. You can be a controller, you can be a people pleaser, you can be a hyperachiever. And this influences the way you are going to react in all parts of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Because what happens is, yeah, just to lead from that, I'm sure you see this yourself, is if you take that analogy of programs, I love this analogy, is what tends to happen is when we're solution grabbing is we're still just installing more and more programs into the system.
Mhm.
But if you've got bugs in the system, how many programs do you want to install?
Exactly that, exactly that. And
Yeah,
this thing which we learn about the brain, and again, I didn't know this a few years ago, but what we experience in the first 7 years of our lives determines absolutely how we are, because
absolutely.
basically
A childhood makes a huge difference. Yeah,
yeah, because we take everything in without filter. We are in a theta, a brain wave. It's nearly like being in a state of hypnosis, and then we react to life as a child, and afterwards we are going to react exactly the same way when we are adults.
absolutely. I work with this business. They're a very successful holistic health business, right? They do very good amount of six-figure sum in revenue and thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars a month, right?
Hmm.
I work with one of their closers, their main closer. She's actually very successful, right? She created for their business almost 200K, $200,000 in revenue in January, right?
Wow.
In February, she's her if we track her results, one of her weeks she had over $80,000 in revenue created. Last week she did over $50,000. This week we're talking about how she's doubting her ability. And when we explored that together in her right side of the brain, the abstract part, we found that was actually coming from her her childhood, right? An unconscious pattern that she's still falling back into. And so when you look at her, you think she's got so many of the right habits and traits to be successful. She had a successful business for 17 years. You look at her calendar, she wakes up at 4 a.m. She's got gym, she's got meditation journal. She's got like, if you look at the actual high performance calendar, it would be like, well, you've got it nailed, but still in that situation. So ultimately, it's just you might think, okay, Daniel and Chiraag, of course you're talking about this stuff because you are coaches, right? You've got a bias to this. But the reality is, just if you see your own experience and you see it happening, is can you see the fact that quite often we're in this solution grabbing mode, which means that what happens is we might go to AI and we just stay in it in solution grabbing. We might go
Mhm.
more to AI now and keep solution grabbing. But what always gets missed is the white in the black in the white.
Absolutely. And you see, thank you so much. When you shared this example, something came to mind, Chirag, is that
Sure.
they are, for instance, what we called hyper achievers. People
Mhm.
always wanted to do the next goals. They work very hard, they spend their time. But when they reach the goal, they're not always happy. It's like, okay,
Mhm.
yeah, I've got it. And they go for the next one. Because what happens is that subconsciously, because perhaps when they were children, they felt that they were not loved enough, they thought that everything, love is conditional. And what happens in then, when they do things, it's not actually for themselves, it's to seek validations from others subconsciously.
Yes, it's a love strategy. Yeah. I've seen this a
Exactly.
lot. I don't know if you've heard of something called the orphan spirit. Have you heard of that?
I have heard of that, yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah. I've seen it across the board because, like I said, I come from a very high performance sales environment.
Hmm.
And funnily enough, I think the common trait across the board of the people that perform the highest had this thing called the orphan spirit,
Hmm.
which is essentially it's pretty much this, your father figure being absent when you're in your younger years of life, and then you have
Exactly.
your love strategy becomes work as a way of gaining love.
Absolutely. Yes. Hmm.
We can work with things like that. Now you might think if you achieve the result, surely the fuel doesn't matter, right? I think it matters a lot, actually.
Exactly. And thank you again for sharing. And what I would say to that as well is that, as business owners, as entrepreneurs, yes, we are very busy, but we have to take time with ourselves and just look inside. And it's not always easy to do it on our own, but we've got this kind of inner child which is still wounded. And how can we do the work to heal? And this is very, very important when we do that, because we are afraid of doing this. But when we start doing this, all of a
Yeah.
sudden life becomes very different.
Yeah, I think the thing to note there is it might not always be that for everyone, but it's a common pattern that we see across a lot of people. It might not be the experience for everyone, but yeah, you are right that it
Of
is
course.
a common trait for a lot of people. Yeah, for sure.
Of course. And thank you. And Chirag, and you've seen a lot of salespeople there. And what makes a salesperson outstanding, different? What would you say? What are the traits? I don't know if it's of character, of behavior, which really, yeah, make the difference right away.
This would be an answer that most people, even as a sales coach, people would be like, "Oh, I can't believe you're saying that." Genuinely, that orphan spirit makes a huge difference.
Open spirit.
That orphan spirit makes a huge difference.
Oh, this orphan spirit, yes.
Yeah, only because because I'm talking about seeing the data across hundreds of sales reps, including inside, right? We look at the ones that perform the highest, even the ones running the business often have had that trait. That's one thing. When it comes to traits and habits, I think it would have to be focus as well. They've structured their lives. If you're talking about the highest performing salespeople, they've structured their lives in a way that like all of their mental energy, as much of it as possible, is into either performing as best as possible or doing as much of the activity as possible from a sales standpoint.
Hmm.
That's high level, ultimately it. Whereas when you look at other people, which if you think about it, how much quote unquote, you won't call it easier, but how it's wired in. If you're an orphan spirit where your love comes from the work that you do, the work that you do, and the reaction that you get from other people, then that's what we do. We always, I think deep down, we're going after love, whether we like to admit it or not, in some way. So these people will work way harder than maybe even you and I, potentially. I don't know, you might have the same spirit, right? I certainly don't work crazy hours. I don't because I have a family, I have a child, and I have the other things which are very, very important to me. But that is a huge factor for sure, I would say.
Yeah. Thanks for that. And I mean, obviously, when we have that, I wouldn't say I am like that. I mean, I'm said since particularly, you
I have
know,
some of it. I think because my father wasn't around for the first like 4 years or so, my wasn't around so much. You just worked for the first 4 years of my life. I have some of it, but not all of it.
okay, yeah. And in sales as well. I mean, you've worked in different industry. We've worked with many people, and can you
Mhm.
share with us some of the biggest kind of transformation you've seen in people? I mean, when, on the time they started working with you, and then afterwards, what came? I mean, in terms of people really changing.
Yeah, I worked. There's so many that I've worked with, but probably that holistic health business is a really good one. Like they were with they were getting their salespeople from a probably the biggest sales recruiting service out there in the high ticket online space, and they were still just churning people. They would have somebody come in who was vetted, supposed to do well, they start well, and then they would get fired. They would have to fire them,
Hmm.
right? This in that cycle, hiring and firing.
Hmm.
Whereas this closer that they've now brought on, she was having a dip, and then she had her best record month in November when we started working together. Um, and just so this is completely clear, in December she still dipped, but she had this really, you would call it a huge personal life thing happen, which
Hmm.
affected her, right? And then back in January, that got resolved. That went back up again, almost $200,000 in revenue created. She's probably going to do the same this month as well. So that's one. You can imagine this business now. You've got somebody in your business that has the capacity and capability to generate $200,000 in revenue. That's quite a
Hmm.
big difference. You don't have to keep worrying about the hiring and firing cycle so much, right? That's one thing for sure. There's a chiropractor business I worked with where initially they had leads coming in who wanted to have an appointment, but they only booked 30% of them into an appointment.
Hmm.
And then the ones that came in, I think they were closing around 25% or so. From working together, their booking rate went up to at least 70%, I think actually higher, from 30 to 70%. And their close rate has gone up to at least 40%, from 25 to 40, but I think it's actually higher, above
Wow.
50%. So that's quite a big difference as well. There's a lot of these when you actually work together specifically. The beauty of it is you can just get highly, highly specific to what you do. That business, as an example, they had so many different sales techniques in their conversations. Their
Hmm.
conversations were way, way, way longer. We shortened them down and stripped it down to the very few things needed for the person to make it a decision. And funnily enough, their numbers actually pretty much doubled.
Wow.
Those are just two examples, but there's so many more.
Thank you for sharing. And obviously, in uh, keeping indicators or tracking the results is very important. So
Yeah.
how do you do that? And for instance, I know some people, some conversations are recorded and people go through them afterwards, particularly if it's on Zoom. Is it
Yeah.
is it some the kind of tools which would be really important to improve people's performance?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like, how do you find the things to work on, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
data tracking, yes, you would have ideally some type of Google sheet or something that, because the data, I always say the data isn't a reflection of your ego, even though we all get caught in that sometimes, but it's a reflection of what to work on. So the
Yeah.
data will reveal, okay, the thing to work on is your close rate, or the thing to work on is the cash that you're collecting, or the thing to work on is your show up rate to meetings, right? It points to it. And then from there, we also might need to do core reviews as well. That's one thing. That's getting into the sales tactical strategy side. Often what I do, for example, with that closer who does about $200,000 in revenue just for herself a month, we don't even touch the sales calls.
Okay.
She comes along, she's very self-aware, she does journaling. She says, "Hey, I know I'm dealing with this energetically." And she talks through, and then we start to explore it in her right brain and go through the steps of integration. Yeah. So just to answer your question, there's three channels, I think. If you've got a business, okay, let's look at the data. It will point to where to work on, or the core reviews, or you're self-aware enough to know, okay, this is a part that I know I need to work on.
Thank you, Chirag. This is really fascinating because what I sense, obviously, is that
Mhm.
this kind of spiritual aspect and this is very important. I mean, in your business, in the way you deal, because sometimes people think about sales techniques and all that, but now we talk about something else. It's really about looking inside. And people like this very successful lady there selling, knowing what she's dealing with, journaling, and you can help her with.
Absolutely, yeah. Just one point I'll add to that is you mentioned it a bit earlier. You mentioned about fulfillment, I think. I think fulfillment is a really, really big topic in sales because to understand what fulfills you in your business and sales, is it to go along? Is it that I'm genuinely fulfilled by making the sale? Is it that I'm genuinely fulfilled by helping others? Both of those have a neediness to it. And the second one in particular, people we don't realize. If I had to realize this in myself was with clients, which is I'm not the one in the seat in the sales conversations. And I found myself having this slight anxiety when I found clients were not getting results straight away, right? I started to take that on board myself. But why am I doing that? Because I feel fulfilled when clients get results, which is a subconscious neediness, right? That's why the
Absolutely.
spirituality is it's so practical. Because what happens is, what if we continually are being fulfilled by these things which lead us into a point of trouble, we need to find a way realistically to be fulfilled without these things, which means spiritual fulfillment. Because when you think about who would be the person that you would buy the most from, would it not be the person that is completely fulfilled and there just to explore what's going on with you? That's it. They're not even they don't need to help you.
Absolutely. And
That
again,
would be the person that you would buy the most from.
exactly the person who is whole as they are. And what you just said, I mean, Chirag, is really about when, I mean, selling. I mean, of course, you offer something which is of tremendous value, but when you do this, actually really wanting to help, but without expectation. And this is the thing. It's like, and you do it because genuinely this is going to help. I mean, things are coming, but obviously, if people first focus on the outcome and the money, the energy is not going to be the same.
Yeah, you can think about it as the thing about it is you can think about it as a switch, or you can think about it as what do we have to go through the ugly truth.
Mhm.
Before I jumped onto this podcast as an example, I don't really jump onto podcasts, right? That's not what I do so much. Is I had this element of, oh, I need to perform on this podcast, but but I had to go through that and own it and find what's that actually getting through to arrive at a place of more fulfillment.
Absolutely. And
That's
you
an
see,
example. So that's the owning and the confessing and the rest of it of these ugly parts of yourself, which lead to something much more beautiful. But it's not the jumping. It's the jumping to the solution we find it doesn't work. That's why I say to everyone, even if you don't resonate with us, working with somebody who knows what they're doing with regards to this is tremendous. It's tremendous
absolutely.
because I turn up to sales conversations when people I speak with, they some would look at them and be like, "You're not doing any techniques. It's so boring." But I don't get objections.
Well, see, thank you for sharing. And you see, this kind of conversation. This is the reason why I'm doing this podcast. It's about being being yourself, being authentic, being vulnerable. And again, we are the way we are.
Yeah.
Whatever people say, it's their thing. It's and as one big learnings I had over the last few years is really
Mhm.
this expression which says never take things personally. Because when
Mhm.
you realize that whatever people say to you, whatever people do to you, it's got nothing to do with you. It's them
Mhm.
reflecting the childhood trauma, their insecurities, their fears, their doubts. So things are not going to they're not going to change, but what we make of that, this is the change, and this is where the peace of mind comes from afterwards.
Absolutely, yeah. I think if you do some of this stuff, like you journal and things, it's very easy to get caught in a I know about this mentality. I know what you guys are talking about.
Uh-huh,
But the
exactly.
reality is, does that create the change?
Exactly. And look, it's been absolutely fascinating, Chirag. And I'd like to ask you if you were to leave our audience with three tips about sales, about the best way to do, what would it be?
Best way to do sales, and your audience is business owners effectively, right?
Yes.
So yeah, I've got to explore it from are they the one in the seat doing sales or are they the one have a team? So I'll try and give three for cover both cases, right?
Hmm.
I think a big tip I would give is that selling eats selling eats a lot of mental energy and attentional space.
Hmm.
Probably the best way to understand it if you're not selling is let's say you have an argument with your spouse. How much attentional space and energy does that take? And when you're selling, what happens is these conversations sit there in your brain network. I had to realize this when I jumped out of doing 35 appointments a week, right? Um, so like seven appointments a day. It And I came out of having to do that full time. I was like, wow, things are so much quieter. I can actually think fully, right? So if you are looking to grow your business and selling is, you're either doing the selling or you're having a team and you're managing the performance. When it comes to constraints, that's the constraint, which is
Hmm.
it's taking your mental energy and time. And that's a big part of what I do is actually starting to remove that away from you so much so that you can go do the next thing you to actually grow the business. So that's one big thing, right?
Hmm.
Is energy and what did I say? Attentional space,
Okay.
right? That's one big thing. Two more, let's see. I think the second one is a big one. Self-reliance is limited. And it's both useful and limited. The contradiction in a way, right?
Hmm.
Self-reliance is like, so things like journaling, meditation, prayer, all of these things have a use, but they're not complete because there are parts of our brain that we don't access unless we're in communion with somebody else who really knows what they're doing. So
Hmm.
if you find yourself in these reoccurring patterns and you look at your habits and what you're doing, and you look at them and think, I'm doing all the right things, then you're not accessing the part of your brain that you need. And I can tell you from personal experience, it's been tremendous. Before I did this work with somebody else, I used to wake up in my mornings feel really frustrated before I got to the office because I felt like my wife was imposing on my time.
Hmm.
When I got back home, I felt the same, very frustrated because I have quite a few things that I need to do when I go home, which is to walk the dogs, feed the dogs, bathe my son, etc., all the rest of it, right?
Hmm.
And that I hardly feel anymore. And that wouldn't have been possible unless if I just did that through journaling, etc. And there's other things as well. I think the other third point to run on is I could talk about stress being a fuel, right? If we're talking about sales, Fulfillment. I could talk about stress, fulfillment, or what else could I talk about? Just to wrap it up. I think I talk
Well,
about stress. What do you think from what we've talked about?
yes, stress, yes, but perhaps another point, if you don't mind, is talking
Yeah.
about more a kind of a holistic approach.
Hmm.
Means in terms of how should people, I mean, salespeople look after themselves in terms of holistic health, if it
Holistic
resonates
health.
with you.
Again, you're going to think I'm biased, though. If I care so much for you that I care about your time and your well-being, I tell you what I would tell myself, which is which is that unless you have somebody there that you can unburden the truth on and you can explore these deeper aspects of yourself, those things are still going to keep running in your brain. That's the reality of things.
Exactly.
And
So,
that's my spiritual design. Whether you believe in something like God or not, it's by design.
exactly. And I think this will be a wonderful conclusion, Chirag. And see, what I really love about this conversation is that you've shown that sales is not just about pressure, but it's about people, it's about
Mhm.
presence and personal transformation as well. And
Mhm.
so, for everybody listening and really wanting to meet you and to work with you, what's the best way to contact you, Chirag?
Yeah, well, I have my website, chiraagthanki.com. It's just my name.com. So you can see my website. I have if you want to just have, even if you just want to go in and grab the things in my one-to-ones that are getting clients results, I share that in my newsletter. So
Okay.
feel free to go in and grab that, or feel free to come along or go to my LinkedIn and we can talk on there.
Well, again, thank you so much. I mean, it's been so insightful and such a pleasure to have you. And thank you
Thanks for
very
having me,
much
Dan.
to all our audience. And I hope you got a lot out of that, particularly in terms of sales to business owners, and really that there's a way to do that. It's about as well doing some work on yourself, surrounding yourself by wonderful people like Chirag, who can help you. And please subscribe to this podcast if you liked it, and as well pass it on to your friends, family, or business colleagues who could really undoubtedly benefit a lot by that. So, again, thank you, everybody, and I will see you at the next episode. Bye bye.